Welcome to Nature Unheard. I'm Emma, and I'm here to bring you stories of resilience, of curiosity, and insights from groundbreaking ideas. Now, have you ever wondered how much a forest is really worth? If fish could talk, what would they say about our rivers? And can AI save biodiversity where humans can't? Join Adonai, Rachael and me along with experts on our journey, from Jordan to Kazakhstan, Kenya to the UK, as we dive deep into the natural world.
Nature Unheard is a podcast
by the EBRD.
Rachael, can we talk about the weather?
Is there anything else worth talking about?
Sorry, again, I know. But I swear we'll have a run of dark, cloudy days in London. I begin to question the meaning of life. Or sometimes it will forecast sun and then the day comes around and there is no sun.
I totally get that. I'll check the forecast. It'll say, oh, absolutely going to be sunny tomorrow. See you then, gorgeous. And then wake up the next day. Nothing. It's the weather equivalent of getting ghosted.
Yeah, you're getting mugged off there. Like me, I check the weather app every day and it will say 80% chance of rain or scattered showers. So I'll rush out the door while it said it's supposed to be raining in a few minutes. And then when we're out, it will be dry for another few hours.
I think what you need to do is check when I'm about to go out because that's a guarantee it's going to pour rain.
Perfect. I'll bear that in mind next time.
But fortunately, there are people trying to understand and fix this situation.
Good, they should be, because today we're talking hyperlocal, minute-by-minute weather. I want to know the exact time my day is about to be ruined.
And to explain how that's even possible, we have a soundbite from Rainbow AI, one of our clients that is using AI to predict the weather. They've created this real-time nowcasting system using satellites, radar, machine learning, and apparently they're the most accurate short-term rain forecaster in the world.
Well, I spoke to Alex from Rainbow AI, and he was telling me that traditional weather models update only every 6 to 12 hours. He was explaining how their model ingests data from nearly 1,000 radars worldwide, blends it with 5 satellites, and produces fresh forecasts not every 6 to 12 hours, but every 10 minutes. He also spoke about real-time weather events related to climate change.
Longer wildfire season, heavier downpours, more extreme events every single year. Unfortunately, this is our new baseline. Everything that happened between those updates, sudden storms, rapid rainfall, dangerous shifts, is simply lost. And in today's climate, that delay is no longer acceptable.
Okay, that's a bit more serious than worrying about a little drizzle on the school run.
I suppose that's the reality we're living in. You know, climate change isn't a distant possibility anymore like I heard about in geography at school. It's changing the world as we sit here and chat to each other. And I guess if we want to adapt, we need information that's as fast as the weather itself.
I love that point about transparency, too, that if we don't know what's accurate, we can't prepare properly. And honestly, we can't afford guesswork anymore.
I know we joke about my experiences taking the dog out, but there's times when guesswork just doesn't cut it. And while real-time forecasting does help us respond to the immediate, the sudden storms, the extremes, we still need to understand the bigger picture.
How weather patterns are shifting, what that means for ecosystems, agriculture, economies.
And how we actually build resilience when nature keeps changing the rules.
Which is why we're so excited to bring in our guest, Carlo Buontempo.
Carlo has spent years thinking about how climate, weather, and nature intersect, and what adaptation really looks like on the ground.
So let's get into it. Carlo, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Great pleasure to be here with you.
So I'm speaking from our lovely studio here in London. And as you know, here in Britain, talking about weather is a national sport. Emma and I were just comparing notes about it. So we have to ask you, what's it doing on your side?
Yeah, well, based in Bonn. Looking out of the window today, it looks a bit overcast, grayish, quite cold, but it's dry. So not too bad all in all.
Would you say it's good? Would you say it's buon even?
Well,
Sorry.
maybe.
I'm sure you must have heard this a million times, but of course I have to mention, I love your surname, Buontempo, and that means
Yeah.
good weather, right? What a perfect name for a meteorologist.
Yeah, well, I guess it means, as in many languages of Latin origin, it means both good weather or fair weather and good time. So you can take it the way you want. I can be good time Charlie or a fair weather friend, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not.
So I have to say, speaking of Latin languages, I am also affected by the determinative nomenclature thing. Have you heard about this? When your last name seems to have some influence on what you do in life.
Right.
So confession, Barza is actually Romanian for stork, the bird.
Oh.
That's a little bit more obscure than Buontempo, I think. But I thought maybe when I was growing up, I'd have lots of children or something, storks bringing the babies. I'm one of 5 myself. But no, it turns out I was meant to host a nature podcast. So I think we're in the same boat.
Indeed, and actually, it's a thing. There is a Spanish journalist who did a podcast about collecting people whose name is related to their profession, and I was one of the guests on this podcast. Quite hilarious. There are really incredible combinations.
That's fantastic. I'll have to add that to my next playlist. But so let's start with your story. How did you find your way into this fascinating field? Was it really the surname? If I were Buontempo, would I have been a meteorologist as well instead of a nature podcaster? There must be more to it than that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was my family name. I always been interested in nature. I come from a quite sciencey family, but my parents were scientists, and so was my grandma, to be honest. But when I was a kid, I was more interested in animal and plants than I was in weather and climate. Actually, I found weather and climate a bit boring as a subject, all about statistics and so on. And then what did it for me was sailing. I love sailing when I'm not studying the climate or working on my computer. I go sailing as much as I like. And being immersed in nature and being so directly affected by the variability of weather and climate, well, certainly triggered an interest in me. And I was studying physics at that time, and I decided to specialize in climate and remote sensing and work basically in different capacity and different roles, but I worked on that field ever since.
That's super cool. I love that you've got this interest in sailing that drives this, because I think sailing was one of those, early fields that tried to develop forecasting for weather and didn't have the tools we have now, didn't necessarily have the very well-established physics models to the degree of nuance we do, but could just have a look at the clouds and figure it out.
Well, absolutely. Actually, Fitzroy, the founder of the UK Met Office, did it to save the life of mariners at sea, because that was the primary goal: improve the ability of sailors to go around the world and deal and trade and come back safely. So there is an intimate connection between sailing and weather, I would say.
So you've mentioned now both weather and climate. And a question I get asked a lot is, what is the difference? What is weather? What is climate? It sounds simple, but I think a lot of people mix them up.
Yeah. Well, there are many possible ways of categorizing the two. I guess the simplest one is that the weather is what you get and the climate is what you expect. So in a sense, the climate is the statistical characterization of the weather over a sufficient long period of time. It's not just the average, it's really the characterization of what might happen. And I guess when things get a bit more interesting is that in recent years, looking back to establish the statistics is not enough, because the climate is changing so fast. And so somehow also the connection between climate and weather is somewhat changing, and it's not just enough to look at what has happened 50, 100 years ago to know what might happen in the future.
That is a little bit scary, I have to say. We're seeing this happen now, right? We're seeing more frequent heat waves and floods and storms. And it certainly seems to me that they're less predictable as well. From your perspective, what are the most critical changes happening in our weather systems today?
Well, maybe this goes back to me being a physicist by training, but in a sense is going back to the fundamental. The main change happening or affecting the climate system is this extra energy that the system has. And this extra energy comes from the increase in greenhouse gases. So the greenhouse gases or the concentration of these gases in the atmosphere is going up, mostly because of human activities. And this changed the balance between the incoming radiation from the sun and the radiation we send back into space. And this imbalance is the main driver for the rising temperatures, the main driver for the expansion of the ocean. So the sea level rise is the main driver for the change in the humidity that the atmosphere holds. That is one of the ingredients for storms. So a lot of the consequences, both in the physical world and in the socioeconomic, our life, our activities, derived from climate change are ultimately a response to this imbalance in energy that has its origin in the change in greenhouse gases concentrations.
I don't want to add to the audience guilt trip here because I think we have enough to worry about with the climate change and carbon, but I've been reading a lot also about how nature loss has its own separate contributing factors to global climate systems and, of course, local climate systems. The scale of deforestation now might actually be affecting the water cycle in a meaningful way, and that really terrifies me.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. One of the beauty or complexity or challenges of the climate is the fact that it's so interconnected. It's not that you can isolate one component and look it fully independent from the rest. So what happens on a local level is a result of a number of factors. Some are locally driven. Changes in land use and afforestation or urbanization is probably the most evident of that. But these also interact with changes that happen on a larger scale. And this can be the moisture content in the atmosphere or the rising temperature or the sea level I was mentioning before. It can be change in circulation. It can be changes in the aerosol loading, the amount of particulate matter that are in the atmosphere. And there is always an interplay between the large scale and the small scale, the large scale driver, and what's really is happening on a much more local scale.
I think I see that driver affecting social change as well. You sort of mentioned urbanization, and there seems to be a bit of a feedback cycle where increasing climate stability, less predictability of extreme weather is making it more risky to live in rural areas in some way. So at EBRD, we've seen in Mongolia, in Ulaanbaatar, the capital, the increasing severity and unpredictability of the winter storms, the dzuds in Mongolia, has been causing people to find living in the rural areas really unsafe in the winter season and driving populations more towards the cities. So we developed the Ulaanbaatar Green Affordable Housing Project to try to build high-quality, safe, and environmentally sustainable buildings for these populations that are driven by the changing climate that's leading to changing weather. So can you tell me a little bit more about how those local weather patterns connect to these big global systems? And can you share an example that might be surprising?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I was saying, is this intertwining nature of climate that I think is fascinating and is important, and the fact that there are a number of things we can do at the local level that modulate risk in a significant fraction. I mean, if you think at risk in terms of a combination of the hazard, the exposure, and the vulnerability, I mean, there are cases in which we can affect the hazard itself, but there are many things we can do in terms of reducing or minimizing our exposure or vulnerability. I guess an interplay between timescale on the hazard side or spatial scale is what has happened in Valencia quite recently. The flooding last year, devastating flooding, and unfortunately, not only costly in terms of infrastructure, but also very deadly in terms of people affected. Well, you can look at that flooding, thinking about a flow of moist and humid air coming from the Mediterranean, interacting with the orography around Valencia, the mountain ridges and the valley in the background. And this enhanced precipitation on the mountain that led to these floods that devastated the southwestern side of the city. So that's a way of looking at it. You can also look at it at very much a larger scale. So what happened in Valencia is a result of one of those pressure centers in the upper air of the atmosphere that is called DANA, the Spanish acronym for that. And this is itself affected by the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, the position of the jet stream, the general circulation pattern. So you have always this interplay between what's happening on a very large scale and what's happening on the local scale.
So these are really big forces. You're talking about these oceanic currents, these atmospheric currents driving this very extreme weather. And you've worked on projects across all different continents. Is there a place where you really felt that power of weather that really left a lasting impression on you?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, many times when sailing, you get into a storm and get scared by the sheer scale of it. But possibly the strongest memory I have of that is when I was in Greenland. During my undergrad, I was operating an instrument in the very north part of Greenland in winter. And that place had little huts every 100 meters in any road, because there is this wind coming out from the plateau and reaching hurricane scale in the space of a couple of minutes. And basically, you cannot survive outside. So the only strategy is not to be outside if there is a risk. And as soon as this wind materializes, you need to take shelter and stay there until this has gone away. And it's just the scale of that make you feel or put you in a position, in a sense. You really realize how small you are with respect to huge forces of nature.
Gosh, I feel that way when I watch videos of boats on the North Sea. I don't know why I do this to myself, because it just absolutely terrifies me to see the storms and the size and scale of the waves that we're just blithely sailing across, hopefully with good information on the end in sight and knowing that we'll be able to weather that weather. But it's really amazing what, a bit of wind can amount to. So that's a super visible type of weather. But we talked on an earlier episode of the podcast about things like marine heat waves that are less visible and probably less damaging to people. It could be really damaging to coral. It kills the coral, bleaches the coral. And so it makes me wonder, how generally could weather prediction benefit nature?
Well, I actually think this is a very good question. I do many of these interviews, and I think it's the first time someone asked me that question. Because normally it's about what is the impact of weather on us, on how things have improved for us. This is a very interesting take. And I guess there are a number of ways in which our improvability of predicting the climate and weather and climate actually can affect nature. The first one is clearly through efficiency. So our processes are energy intensive very often and polluting to some extent. And knowing in advance the coming of a heat wave or a particular condition, or simply just knowing the weather in advance, as we do now, may allow us to optimize our production, optimizing our transport, our activities, reducing energy, reducing consumption, so which has an indirect but important impact on nature. The second element is possibly more direct. So in anticipating actions, and this being flooding, this being fire, heat waves, may allow us actually to take action directly on nature. If you think in terms of this bushfire in Australia and these images of the koala burning and the like, well, knowing that this was going to happen, or that a significant shortage of water could affect the biodiversity in rivers or stuff like that, may allow local administration to take action and decide proactively to engage and minimize or modulate that risk.
I think the avoided emissions point is really interesting, and something people might not have thought about themselves. If you can predict when the really bad storm is going to be, you won't necessarily be stuck in traffic when the road you expected to use is flooded, and you won't have to reroute to a more long distance that's going to use up more of your gas, your petrol in your car. Or, to the extreme point, maybe we can protect the road from being washed out and don't need to embed the carbon in having to rebuild that. So that's a surprising link, I think. But to be a little bit lighter, I have to know why, if these prediction models are so sophisticated that we can, protect our economies, protect nature, why can't we predict my holidays? I feel like every time I plan a vacation where I'm sure it's going to be sunny, it doesn't work out that way.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, in some respect, it happens to all of us. When it really matters, then all of a sudden the lovely prediction turns out to be wrong, and so on. But this is our personal experience, and we know that we are not very reliable as a measure of weather or climate or our personal recollection. So when you look at the performance of our weather prediction model, it's much better to look across the board for all sorts of parameters in all sorts of regions. And when you do that, you realize that contrary to the common belief, weather prediction have improved massively. I mean, I would argue that no other sector of human endeavor has improved so much as the prediction of weather. Just to give you something that is very concrete, from the time I was at university in the 90s to now, we gain more than 2 days. So the 5 days prediction now are as accurate as the 3-day prediction 20 plus years ago. That's, if you think about it, it's incredible. Think about the economic value of this information. We can predict with much more accuracy what's going to happen in a few days' time, which means knowing what sort of product you want to keep in shop, or what sort of clothes to put on, or what sort of production you want to prioritize. Or, I mean, there are so many implications, not just for us and our holidays, but for society at large, starting from saving life and protecting properties.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is the grocery store is more likely to have ice cream in stock during a heat wave now, which is really the essential thing.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a case study. I think the Met Office did with a very famous supermarket chain who made a fortune out of a forecast of a heat wave in late summer because they kept the ice cream in stock. So I think it's quite a nice story.
So big money in weather prediction, weather forecasting. And the technology also, as you mentioned, is evolving really fast. It seems at an accelerating rate. What are some of the most exciting recent developments, and how do you see AI in particular transforming climate adaptation and resilience planning?
Yeah, well, you're touching it directly in the sense that the biggest revolution in weather prediction at the moment is AI. And is AI in a way that maybe some of the listener do not know, because when we talk about AI in general, our imagination immediately brings us to the chatbots like ChatGPT or the like, which are extraordinary and fascinating tools. But within weather prediction itself, that technology allowed us to make prediction in a fundamentally different way. So up until a few years ago, predictions were made by writing the equation governing the dynamic of the atmosphere and the ocean, the transfer of energy, the radiation from the sun, and so on, and then solving those equations numerically using massive supercomputers. We still do that, but at the same time, we start using machine learning tools that solve the equation without actually writing the equation, just informed by the observation we have of the world around us. And contrary to pretty much everyone's expectation, these black boxes started producing predictions that were better than those based on our equations and our physical understanding. And nowadays, our best weather prediction model at ECNWF is no longer a weather prediction model based on our equation. It's a weather prediction model based on an AI model we develop ourselves, a machine learning model. So has been a true revolution within the sector, and this is changing so many things in the way we do weather forecasts, but also in the way we do services on the back of these forecasts, or we do services for climate and long-term projections.
That's really incredibly impressive. I know it's not quite the same thing, but I feel we've come a long way from computers just barely beating humans at chess to now computers developing statistical forecasting models better than we could do ourselves. But we made the computers, we made the AI models, so we still get credit for that as humanity, I think. Next question, can we go beyond predictions? We've got all this technology available to us. What's the state of scientific possibility about potentially controlling the weather? Is that possible? Is that just me reading too much science fiction?
Well, I guess the idea of weather modification has been with us since we have been around. I feel the power of this weather event is so dramatic and so incredible that has always fascinated us as humans. And so the idea of being able to modify or use or redirect this energy in a way that was useful to us is clearly a very powerful idea. Unfortunately, we are not able to predict the weather in any predictable way. So the idea that we can steer a storm in a different direction through some sort of engineering doesn't hold water at the moment. There are some local modification of the weather, like cloud seeding, to make, in some condition, precipitation more likely. But it's normally relatively small scale and relatively not fully working, let's say. On the other hand, we have been modifying the weather on big time through pollution, through the change in land use, through the change in the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases and particulate matter. So in that sense, we have modified the weather over the last couple of hundred years, and more generally over the last millennium, let's say, because of our activities.
So let's end on a more hopeful note. What can nature's resilience teach us about facing extreme weather events?
Oh, I don't know. I'm reading currently the book of Taleb about anti-fragility. So the idea that actually nature is a system that is not fragile, is anti-fragile, is over-redundant, that there are a number of ways that are fragile, a number of parts that are fragile, but this is per se not a problem. It actually builds resilience of the entire system. So in a sense, if you look at the Earth system and the planet as a whole, I would think that's very resilient and very anti-fragile as a system. But we are the fragile part. So I think there is a good chance. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's entirely plausible that we can push ourselves to extinction. And this won't alter the planet in the long run. The planet will find a way to survive us. But just to be positive, that's what you asked me to do. I feel that there are many, many ways in which we can change that trajectory. So it's not, I don't think that the future is our extinction. It's up to us to decide what our future is. And our best ally in that process, in defining what our future is like, is science, is evidence, is not delude ourselves by negating the information or denying the information that we receive, that we have from satellite, from observation, from models, from science, from general knowledge. So if we start from the evidence, if we start from what we know, if we start from the observation we receive, then we can inform our decision and have a better chance of taking a track for the future that can lead to not to extinction, but possibly to prosperity and long-term survival.
That's a much more positive message. Thank you. I'm feeling much more cheered about things now. I think I'll leave the geosolar engineering stuff to the sci-fi authors. Good reads, but maybe not something we want to trust in that science will save us. You know, science can get us there. Our own actions help us on that path. And I think combined is a lot to be optimistic about in the future. So, Carlo, any closing thoughts for our audience?
Well, just reiterating for me that we are all allowed to our own idea and theories and vision of the world. But I don't think it makes much sense to be allowed to have alternative facts. Facts are facts, and it should be the basis of our decisions.
Keep it in fact rather than fiction, whether science or other. Thank you so much, Carlo. I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insights and for the great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We're helping make cities more livable across our regions, including the example Rachael mentioned earlier, improving houses in Ulaanbaatar and helping people stay warm through the harsh winter months. This project in Mongolia was supported by EBRD donors, Austria, the Green Climate Fund, and Japan through the EBRD's Green Cities programme. Our client, Rainbow AI, has also been supported by the European Union through the EBRD's Star Venture programme.